get the recording going.
It looks like it. Maybe, there it goes.
All right, thanks. I'm going to go ahead and call the committee to order. This is the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Grant Program that we are working off of. And today, I'm getting down to this is for the review committee, and today being Friday, March 3rd. And just for the record, we are going to be opening up the committee for taking in information. Today is we do not have anything as of action items, and so this will be more of an informational hearing and stuff. And if we were going to have any action items today, we would not be able to take any votes unless we have a quorum of voting members available. And at this point, I believe we're shy one. But as I mentioned, from what Ian has shared with me and looking at the agenda that hopefully others have been able to see, this is really more informational, getting in that concepts in front of us for consideration. So again, thanks for everyone that's here. Instead of going through and having everyone identify themselves at this point, unless we think we need to do that for a protocol, I'd say let's just go ahead and go into public comment. Ian, do we want to go through and have everyone ID themselves?
No, I've been making notes as people have joined, so unless you would like us to, we're fine.
I think that's fine. That way we'll just go ahead and move in to the public comment perspective for anyone that's here. And I'm going to jump back to that screen that is attending the meeting, that want to make public comment. This is an opportunity for you to do so. And so if you would recognize by either verbally stating that you'd like to make public comment, raise your hand, or do something else to get our attention. All right, not seeing anyone jumping up or yelling or screaming for public comment. Let's go ahead and move into our number 3 item. This is the preview of the racial disparity tool. Ian and Carrie, I know you two are going to be handling this, so I'll let you take the lead.
All right, sounds good. I will pull up my screen. Okay, so as Senator Przanski just mentioned, there are a couple agenda items, and our plan was to go through them one by one. One moment. Here we go. Okay, so we'll take that first item first, as you might assume. And so the first is an introduction to the new racial disparity tool on sentencing. And so myself and Carrie will be walking through this. So I guess for the record, I am Ian Davidson. I'm the Justice Reinvestment Program Manager at the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. And so I'll kind of provide a little bit of overview for this tool before Carrie walks you through it. So first, we'll talk about why this tool was created and why it exists, and then we'll talk about what this tool is and what it isn't. Then we'll provide a couple definitions that might be helpful as we consider this tool, and then Carrie will then talk about the design of the new tool and then provide some examples from the new tool. So to that first question, why a racial disparity tool? So I want to note here that Nate Gowiran, a member of this committee, and a couple others that have been on this call, they've actually seen this tool. This tool was developed in part with some feedback from grantees. And so I want to just say thank you to those that have participated to this point. But to that question of why a racial disparity tool, there's a couple reasons. For this audience, I think the principal reason is that you all specifically asked for this tool. You, like the commission and the agency, we have been thinking about how best to assess and address disparities within the criminal legal system writ large, but especially for the systems funded by the Justice Reinvestment Grant Program. And so we as a commission, we're committed to understanding those disparities and then doing our best to minimize them. And so that, I think, is the primary reason for this tool. Now, part of the reason of why this tool is a racial disparity tool is because we do not have a wealth of data on historically underserved groups. And so we're limited by the data that we have available to us. We have pretty good race, ethnicity, and gender data, which is what we present in this tool. We do not have good centralized statewide data on other historically underserved populations. Now, I think it's worth mentioning that this, of course, does not mean that counties themselves should neither collect nor present that data locally. It's just that we, as the commission, we are unable to present a robust statewide database and present that information authoritatively in a tool. And another big piece of why this tool and why now is that we needed a tool that could convey information that was useful to both smaller counties as well as larger counties. Some of you may remember that last cycle we released a race, ethnicity, and gender dashboard. And one of the weaknesses of that old tool was that it relied heavily on percentages to convey information. And without getting too in the weeds, percentages are really useful to larger counties. They're less useful to smaller counties. And so it proved it became a challenge, especially for smaller counties, but I think for many counties. And this falls into this fourth bullet point, which is that we needed a tool that presented data in a way that was accessible to both grantees and then also to you all, to the grant review committee. And so because the old tool relied on percentages, which again, I'll say what is usually pretty helpful for larger counties, the percentages were, even in those instances, we've heard that percentages were in some cases harder for decision makers to really understand the information in a way to where they could take action. And so to put it succinctly, percentages can be a bit more abstract, while firm numbers that counts the number of people is a bit more accessible to policymakers and then therefore more actionable. And so this racial disparity tool, we think of it as a tool for two core audiences. It is a tool for grantees, but also a tool for you all, the grant review committee. So next, I'd like to talk about what this tool is and what it isn't. And so first, it is the first of a new suite of disparity tools that we hope to launch in the coming months and years. Now, it's the first of because this has a narrow focus. It is a racial disparity tool for sentencing, and we are focusing specifically on the measure for probation sentences as opposed to jail or prison. And the reason for the focus on probation is that because that is the outcome that is most aligned with the justice reinvestment goals. And so what it isn't, it is not an all-encompassing criminal justice racial disparity tool. This tool doesn't look at, for example, arrests or pretrial detention or the speediness of trial, any of those other kind of metrics that might be measured as part of the criminal legal system writ large. It also isn't a tool for identifying individual cases. However, it is a resource to inform grant program development. And so this is a tool that will be provided and made available to grantees publicly facing on our website. And then grantees can use this tool and then with the information in hand, perhaps make changes to their grant programs. And so it will inform the decisions that they make locally on what their applications look like. This tool, however, does not determine grant funding. This is very similar to our prison usage dashboard, where even with the baseline that we have, we, unlike some other states with justice reinvestment initiatives, do not have a must reduce prison usage by 5% or else do not receive funding kind of decision-making structure. This tool is designed to be informative, not determinative. And then next, it is a resource to inform grant program review. And so, as I mentioned before, there's two key audiences for this tool. The first are the grantees, the second is you all. And then last, this is not a tool for gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, religious affiliation, or any other demographic categorizations. As I mentioned before, this is a narrowly focused tool, and eventually we'd love to be able to have other disparity tools in our suite, but for now it's narrowly focused on sentencing. So before I pass it over to Carrie, I think it would be helpful to go over some definitions. And so when we are talking about our racial disparity tool for sentencing, it's helpful to understand what we mean when we say parity. So parity, very simply put, is numerical equivalence. It's similarity. So 5 equals 5. Now, when we say disparity, it is numerical difference. It's a lack of similarity. So 5 is not equal to 6. And so in that vein, the tool itself is not a judgment claim. The tool is a reflection of the data that we are presenting. If the tool says 5 is different than 6, that is a disparity. The tool is identifying that difference. So this is information that is then empowering decision makers, both locally and then also you as the grant review committee, to consider what changes or recommendations need to be made, but it is not determinative. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Carrie to kind of orient you through the new tool.
Thank you, Ian. So I wanted to start here at a place looking at data that we're all a little bit more familiar with, just to kind of get us rolling, get us oriented with where the tool lives. So what you're looking at right now is just your prison use data. So the same data that you've been using for years to evaluate the grant applications, comparing prison use to the baseline. This version of it is now part of the new dashboard. So the look is a little bit different than probably what you've seen in the past. Within this dashboard, you can see there's also information about the county programs. That whole list on the left is showing the different categories of ways that we're looking at JRI prison use data and programs. And now included in that list is this new JRI racial equity tool. So this is where you would go if you're a grantee and you're wanting to fill in your application and find this data. So when grantees land on the racial disparity page, they'll see 2 plots, and I've widened them out right now so we can just kind of focus on what they are first. The one on the left is the main tool, and that will tell you if you have a disparity between sentencing for the white population and sentencing for any of these 4 minority groups. The plot on the right will then allow the grantees to focus more on what crime types might be contributing to that disparity so that they can think about how resource allocation can potentially be directed to address any disparities that they're seeing. For the racial disparity tool, what we're showing is the gap between the rate at which the white population are sentenced to probation, as opposed to prison or jail, and the rate at which a minority group is sentenced to probation. That gap is represented by the number of additional people in the minority group that would be sentenced to probation if those rates were exactly the same. So a value of 0 would mean that there's perfect parity. The rates are exactly the same. There's no more and no fewer minority individuals that we would expect to receive probation sentences. The more positive the value, the more people would have had to receive a different sentence if there were parity at that time. It's important to keep in mind, as Ian mentioned a few slides ago, that this does not mean that we are pointing to specific individual cases where the sentence was inappropriate or should be changed. We're just looking at differences to help guide investment decisions. For the crime type plot, what you'll see is the number of prison or jail admissions for each crime type for the time period and race indicated. And it will also give you information about the sentence lengths for each crime type. Okay, so let's look at how the data will actually look. So this is what you would see if you navigated to this page right now. So we're going to stay on statewide data. We're looking at the male population here to kind of walk through what we're seeing. You can see now we have a curve in the left-hand plot for each minority race, and you can see kind of trends over time. And we do think that the trends are important and not just single data points. And so this is basically, this image right here is what we would present to you for each county as we review county applications. And the grantees will be able to view this data live on the dashboard. And there are a lot of additional tools built into this page and elsewhere in the dashboard that they would then be able to really kind of put this information into a broader context as they're filling in their applications. So if we were evaluating this data as if it were a particular county, we might see this trend of positive values in that dark blue curve for Black and the orange curve for Native men for the past 10 years, basically from 2012 to 2020. This suggests maybe a long-term trend of disparate rates of probation sentences that could be driven by any number of factors. We may also have questions about the higher values that we saw in the past 5 years for Latinx men that we're seeing in that lighter blue curve there. If we were reviewing this as county data, we might then look at their application to see if they were introducing any culturally responsive services to improve the success of their Native, Black, or Latinx men in their community, or if they've identified specific drivers for these results. So now we'll go ahead and show 2 actual county examples, one from where I live in Polk County, and one for where Ian lives in Marion County. Okay, so again, as a reminder, we've plotted it against years because it is important, I think, to look at trends and not single data points. So for example, for Polk County, the 2022 data point is maybe popping up, but that's just a single data point. And it's not a very large magnitude. Overall, looking at this data, Polk County shows neither a trend nor large magnitudes of disparity in any racial group for men. So their response on the JRI application could indicate if they think that they have a specific program that's resulting in a high degree of parity, and they would request then to continue to fund that program, or it would be their decision how to address it in their application. But this would be an example of, this is basically parity over a long period of time for each racial group. So Marion County has a lot of high magnitude variability for Latinx men in that lighter blue curve. But overall, I would say there's no trend really with the Latinx. I think those high variabilities are probably because that's the largest minority population in Marion County. But if you also look closely, you can see the dark blue curve for Black men is consistently above 0 until 2020, which is when COVID kind of hits. This means that if you look at the axis and the numbers on the left, to be at parity, they would on average need about 5 additional probation sentences for Black men each year. So in this example, this grantee might choose to address this disparity. They might request resources for culturally specific services to improve the success of justice-involved Black men in their community. Alternatively, they may indicate specific drivers in the application for why this disparity has occurred, or may determine that new program expenditures are not appropriate, given the low number of people that we're talking about, but choose to convene a focus group of justice-involved Black men, for example. Either way, they will have that opportunity to look at this data and use it to design their programs and complete their JRI application. And then the committee, in turn, would then have this as the context in which they would be evaluating that portion of the grantee's application. The team here at CJC has offered throughout this process, and will continue to offer, to work with grantees who want to dive deeper in the data. So if Marion County was saying, we don't necessarily know what to do with this data, we would absolutely, dive in and try to give them any assistance that they required. Similarly, if there are concerns expressed by the committee about any particular grantee or data point, we're always happy to either go live to the dashboard to look for answers there, or do additional analyses as necessary. So this tool is just sort of supposed to be a snapshot, but we're always willing to assist understanding the data a little bit more. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Ian to kind of wrap up this portion of today's meeting.
Thanks, Carrie. So that was a good segue to this next piece, which is how we will use the racial disparity tool during our grant review committee meetings. And so as Carrie indicated, what you will see, what we will present for each county application that you are considering is this image. Of course, it'll be a full-size image like we just saw, but it will be a static image indicating where they are as presented on our racial disparity tool for sentencing. And so it will be a good chance for us as a committee, or you all as a committee, to look at both the trend and magnitude for these different counties. And then, as I mentioned before, we are not providing any kind of cutoff or threshold by which something should be addressed by programming. The tool is informative, not determinative, and we, unlike with prison usage, where we will be triaging and sticking counties into buckets of that we sort them by which maybe we do a deeper dive or just look at them programmatically. Our plan is not to do that for the racial disparity tool for sentencing. One of the strengths of this tool, and one of the things that we are hopeful that this tool will become, is that it will give a chance for grantees to really respond to the data that's presented. And so we have retailored our grant application, and we'll touch on this in more detail a little later on in the meeting. But we have one specific question around racial disparities, where we are prompting grantees to look at this tool and then to respond to that tool. And so it'll be a good chance for them to consider, okay, what I'm seeing here, maybe there is a disparity, and then they could do a deeper dive. Okay, which racial group is it happening to? Okay, is it happening to men or women? And if so, which kind of crime type is it happening to? Oh, it's principally property. So then they locally can have a conversation and think about, okay, do we need to create a new program? Do we need to change how we are operating a program? And then having those fruitful conversations locally, we hope, will then create stronger applications that then eventually are presented to you. Next, I want to note here, and again, we'll touch on this in a little bit later on, is that while we only have one question specifically referencing the racial disparity tool for sentencing, there are other questions that may inform or be informative as you all consider funding decisions and feedback for Justice Reinvestment Grant programs. I'll give an example. We have a question around target populations that is previously we used to have them as narratively structured questions where they would articulate in some cases by paragraph or multiple paragraphs who their population was that they were serving. We're moving towards a checkbox approach where they can indicate, okay, these are the particular populations that we're serving for this discrete program. For this other program, it's a different population. For this program, it's a different one. And so in some cases, counties will say, okay, we have a culturally specific program that serves, let's say, Black men. Okay, great. So as you all review the data presented in the racial disparity tool for sentencing, you can then take a peek at not only the questions specifically addressing the racial disparity tool, but the other questions that have relevance. And so that is, we think, one of the strengths of this tool, coupled with the reformatting of the grant application. And the final thing, and we'll touch on this later on as well, is that the way we have structured the application timeline, it'll give you all a chance to provide feedback earlier in the process. And so as opposed to only being able to provide feedback on a couple items that are in the application, you'll be able to provide feedback to what is functionally everything that is programmatically that deals with the programs themselves. And so if you have any concerns or if you have any questions with the way that they answered a question around racial disparities, or if you need clarification, that is all the kinds of things that we can then gather from you, put into feedback, and then send as a letter to the grantees back in June. And so then they have until August to provide that feedback or take into account that feedback and then make changes to the application if needed. So that concludes what we had prepared for the racial disparity tool for sentencing. I want to pause here and Chair Przanski, if it's okay, maybe take questions.
Yeah, this would be a great time. So colleagues, if you have questions, please note, either raise your hand or verbalize, and we'll let Ian and Carrie take those questions. All right, I'm not seeing anyone jumping up wanting to ask any questions. So thank you for the presentation.
Oh, we have a question from Lisa, it looks like.
Not really
Okay.
a question, but thank you for your hard work on this. As always, it's nice to see these kind of things in front of us so that we can make more informed decisions. So I personally appreciate you and your team being able to get this accomplished for us. So thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, Senator, if it's okay with you, we can go on to the legislative reports.
That'd be great. And as Lisa just said, I think for all of us, thank you. It's very impressive. You know, visuals really do make a difference in my life as to being able to acknowledge and see how things are paired together and what trends we see or don't see. So yeah, again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Catherine, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ian. Hi, everyone. For the record, my name is Catherine Talon. I'm Senior Research Analyst here at CJC, and we're going to switch gears a little bit, and I am going to give a brief overview of the 2 justice reinvestment legislative reports we recently published. Okay, so the first one I want to give an overview of is the House Bill 3194 Cost Avoidance Report. This report CJC staff puts together every year using figures provided by the Department of Corrections. And really the goal of this report is to detail the process and the calculations done to arrive at the net avoided cost to the state government as a result of House Bill 3194. So I just have some high-level figures here and then some considerations when you're looking at those figures. First, based on the October 2022, our most recent corrections forecast, the net avoided cost to the state has, since 2013, has been about $635 million. At the same time, the Justice Reinvestment Program funding since 2013 has been $200 million. So a couple of things to consider when looking at those figures are that the net avoided cost to the state figure, that $635 million, includes about $231 million avoided by not building a new prison in the 2017-2019 biennium. So just something to consider with that larger net avoided cost figure there. And then, of course, over the course of the last 10 years, there's been a lot of legislative changes. Those can make changes to prison use and therefore cost to the state. And then the COVID-19 pandemic had a large effect on prison use. We all know that it dropped quite significantly at the beginning of the pandemic. And so that has had some effect on the net avoided cost as well. So this is really high level. There's a lot more information in the report, so feel free to check out the report on our website or ask us any further questions about how these were calculated. But that's it for cost avoidance report for now. The second report I want to give an overview of is House Bill 3078 report, which is our report on the impact of House Bill 3078 on prison utilization, recidivism, and public safety. For this group, we're going to focus on the county prison use data for the JRI competitive grant that's included in the report, but it also has information about FSAP, ID theft and theft 1 sentencing, and a few other legislative changes. So 2 notes before we hop into the next slides. I'm going to show some data slides here really quickly, but in the next biennium, what has previously been called the supplemental grant will be called the competitive grant. I am going to do my best to say competitive grant for the next few slides. I've been saying supplemental grant for some time, so give me a little bit of grace if I slip up there. But the goal is to avoid confusion with supplemental rounds of the formula grant. But that said, the figures in the next couple slides are going to make notes of supplemental grant, non-supplemental grant. What we really mean is the competitive grant. And another thing to note is that in the following figures, you'll see this in the key down at the bottom too. CJC staff made the decision for this year's report to compare our baseline prison use for these counties, which is that typical 2012 to 2015 figure that we see on the dashboards, to a combined 2018-2019 prison use figure and a 2021-2022 prison use figure. We did not include 2020 prison use in these years on purpose. I mean, the goal really is to remove some of the COVID-19 effect, some of that giant drop in prison usage right at the beginning of the pandemic. We can't avoid all the effect. There's some still seen in the 21-22 use figures, as we'll see. Okay, so these next 2 slides show the 13 counties that are currently receiving competitive grant funding. This group of counties has changed a little bit, and Ian can tell you which counties have come and gone. But for now, we have it broken into the large counties in this first slide and then the small counties in the second slide. It makes it a lot easier to visualize them if they're in similar population levels. So for this visualization, we have Deschutes, Douglas, Jackson, Josephine, Lane, Marion, and Multnomah counties. And that black bar on the far left side for each county is our baseline. That's our 2012 to 2015 prison use scaled to 2 years. The gray bar in the middle is our 2018 and 2019 combined calendar year figure. So that's sort of our pre-COVID-19 figure for prison use. And then our 21-22 combined on the far right side. That's that sort of, it's hard to see here, but it's spotted gray. Hopefully it's a little bit easy to distinguish. In general, we see that counties that have received this competitive grant funding have seen a decrease in prison use. That's true for our large and then our small counties in the next slide. But here we see significant drops for the largest of the large counties, right? Lane, Marion, and Multnomah. And then similarly, we do see from baseline to most recent 2 years drops generally in prison use. Okay, so here we have our small counties. So this is the same plot as the last one, just different scale and on the y-axis here. So Columbia, Crook, Klamath, Lincoln, Wasco, and Yamhill have all received competitive grant funding or are currently receiving competitive grant funding. And similarly, we see the baseline on the left-hand side and then our most recent 2 years on the right-hand side, and we generally see a decrease in prison use over the course of the program. Perfect, thank you, Ian. So this last slide here is sort of a combination of those last 2. We have on the left-hand side the prison use figures for all those counties that received competitive grant funding, and on the right-hand side, counties that did not receive competitive grant funding. Both have seen a decrease in prison use over since 2012 from that baseline to the most recent 2 years. Although if we take a look at the left-hand side, we see those that do receive the competitive grant funding have a greater decrease in prison usage. And that covers the 3078 report. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those. Or if you just want to go look at the reports, also there's some pretty detailed information there.
Catherine, thank you. Let's see if there are any questions from anyone. And again, thanks for putting the reports together.
No questions from me. Great job. Thank you.
No questions
Okay.
for me either.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
So Senator, we have one other agenda item that we can proceed to if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm just going to let you continue to take the lead.
Perfect. Okay, I will present those slides now. Okay, so next up on our agenda, and this is the, I guess, penultimate agenda item, which is the preview of 2023 Justice Reinvestment Grant activities. And so before I get into the timeline of events that will be occurring in 2023, I think it would be helpful to provide a little more additional information about the changes to the formula grant application that I referenced earlier in my presentation. And so we've spent the last couple of years here at the CJC rethinking our grant application process. And one of those changes we implemented last biennium, which was to break the Justice Reinvestment Grant formula application into two parts, a preliminary application followed by a final application. Our plan for this biennium is to keep that two-stage approach. However, one of the changes that we will be making from last biennium to this biennium is that we will be moving all of the programmatic questions to the preliminary application stage. We're doing this for a few reasons. The principal among them is that it is a chance for counties to receive feedback on all programmatic things from the Grant Review Committee earlier in the process, well before funding decisions are made. We received some positive feedback from counties about the two-stage process, and one of the changes that we are now implementing as a result of some of that feedback is to have more items front-loaded so they can receive feedback earlier on. And so, and we have previewed these changes to a focus group recently of grantees, and we've incorporated some of their feedback into the questions themselves and the process. And to give you another preview of some of the changes, and I mentioned this earlier, is that the application itself will be shorter. We actually have fewer questions, but more importantly, these questions are more focused on the key goals and legislative mandates around the Justice Reinvestment Grant Program. In some cases, these questions that were previously narrative-based are now drop-down menus or check boxes, as opposed to, it turns out that when you give grantees a text box and ask them a simple question that could be answered in one sentence, you sometimes wind up with 2 paragraphs. And so this fixes that problem, but probably more significantly from the CJC's end, it more easily allows us to pull reports on the data on the kinds of things that are being funded through the Justice Reinvestment Grant Program. So very easily we can definitively say there are this many culturally specific services funded by Justice Reinvestment. There's this much money going to housing. There are this many pretrial programs funded by Justice Reinvestment. And this also, of course, makes it easier for grantees as well as for you who are reviewing the grant applications each year. So next, to pivot to the dates. So we're fast approaching the time when grant information will be released and then applications will be due. So we are tentatively looking at an April 1st launch for our formula application, and we will release both the preliminary application questions as well as the final application questions. A little more than a month later, almost 2 months later, at the end of May, we anticipate having the preliminary application for the formula grant due. And then about a month later, we are tentatively planning on having you all, the Grant Review Committee, come and meet to review those preliminary applications. And we are looking at dates after June 25th for a couple reasons. One is that it will give us, CJC staff, as well as you, the grant review committee, a month with the applications to review. The second piece is that because June 25th is the constitutional sine die, and so the legislature will be done. Hopefully, many of you on this call will be able to take a deep breath and be able to spend a little more time on justice reinvestment. And so it will hopefully be easier to schedule a meeting as well. That being said, a couple questions that I have for you all as we look at scheduling these meetings is, by our estimation, a June meeting to review all of the preliminary applications will take a full 8 hours. So our question to you is, would you prefer that to be an all-day meeting? Or would you prefer it to be 4 2-hour meetings or 2 4-hour meetings? Or if you're feeling really adventurous, maybe a 1 1-hour meeting and a 1 7-hour meeting. I'll note here that there are, of course, challenges scheduling more meetings, but that's something that we're happy to do. And then the other question I have around that is, would you all prefer to do that in person or remote? And so, Chair Brzezinski, if it's okay with you, I'd love to hear the feedback from grant review committee members.
You bet. Members? Patty?
If we're doing it in person, I would prefer to do one day. If we're doing it remotely, I would prefer to have it be broken up into chunks so that we can actually get out of our chairs.
I agree with Patty, for sure.
I would agree with Patty as well.
Do you all feel strongly about in person versus not in person?
No, no. I think
It
we're all
depends
going to
on the food.
When
If
would
it is
that
an all-day
take place,
meeting,
Ian?
Sorry?
Yeah.
When would that take place?
It would take place the last week of June, first week of July, depending on availability.
Okay. Yeah, I could go either way then.
Yeah. Location, location, location.
I would imagine we would host it at our offices.
Yep.
So Salem.
Well, it seems like we have consensus for those who are participating today. Maybe send out something to the whole committee and basically saying this is what the options are, or this is where we're kind of at, and to see what other people say and see if there's any change. But this seems like the most efficient way for us to be able to accommodate everyone.
Okay. And if we do end up going the remote route, are you all thinking like from 2 to 4 for 4 days that week? Is that easier for you all?
I'd rather just get it done in 2 days if it's remote.
Okay,
Same with me.
that's good to know. Any preference to mornings or best? I like to wake up and do grant review committee stuff.
Well, it was knowing the time of year, we'll probably be more inclined wanting our afternoons to ourselves.
That's fair. Okay.
Yep.
Agreed.
Perfect. Okay, we'll reach out to the other members and go from there. So let me get back to my presentation and walk you through the rest of the calendar year. So once we all meet at some point in end of June, beginning of July, you all will have feedback, and like last time, you will tell me and tell the staff what the feedback is. We will put that together in a letter and then send that out to counties, at which point we're tentatively thinking that we provide that feedback by mid-July, in which case counties have a chance to incorporate that feedback and then submit a final application to the formula grant on August 25th. That will also be the due date for the competitive grant, the victim services portions of the grant, as well as if a county chooses to submit a evaluation or a research application. Historically, only 2 counties have done that, but for those 2 counties or for other counties, that would also be the due date. And then once we have those final applications in place, we would then schedule to meet as a grant review committee sometime in October to review those final applications as well as the competitive applications. That would also probably take a full day. And so depending on the preference of the grant review committee, when we reach out to those other members, that may be 2 half days or 1 full in-person day. And then at that meeting, you would develop your recommendations, and the commission would then meet mid-November to make final funding decisions. And because there's a lot of moving pieces, especially for the Justice Reinvestment Grant Program, I think it's sometimes helpful to think of this graphically. And so for the Justice Reinvestment Grant Program, there are, at least for the portions that the Criminal Justice Commission operates, there's kind of 4 pieces to it. The formula grant, which is broken into 2 phases, the preliminary and the final phase. And then the evaluation piece, it's that research piece. So 3% of all funds of Justice Reinvestment funds are allocated to research. And so counties, if they would like to retain those funds, they can conduct their own research locally. 10% of all funds must go to community-based victim services. They submit applications to the counties. There is a panel of local community-based victim service providers and experts in that field that meet and review those applications. In fact, Sarah Stewart, who's on our committee, also serves on that committee as well. And so, and then the last piece is the competitive grant, previously known as the supplemental. And so that piece you all review. So the competitive as well as all the pieces of the formula you review. So in terms of dates, the preliminary will be due the end of May, with the final application, the evaluation, victim services, and the competitive portion all due end of August. So with that, that concludes this portion of the presentation and also our prepared materials for today.
All right, well, thank you very much. Let's just see if there are any other questions regarding any of the presentations that we had today. Well, let me say for, I think, all of us, the efficiency in presenting everything today, it was great. Of course, the materials were fantastic. It really does show, I mean, it's really, for me, as someone that's been around with CJC, going through its formation and stuff, you really have taken it to another level, giving us good data, means to actually utilize the data and visually actually see what the impact has been on various programs and how we can address shortfalls, comings, and how we can expand on positives. So Ian, and for the whole team, thank you very, very much. Colleagues, any other questions or comments?
I just have one. I've heard over the last, it's been probably a year or so, other jurisdictions just wanting some guidance on resources to how to address the racial disparity types of issues they have within their counties. And I'm wondering if there's a resource area when we do review these grant applications, can we somehow help them find those resources? And if there's a way to do that on the CJC website, I think that would be helpful.
Thanks, Nate, for that suggestion. It's something that we've been talking about internally. Some of you may be familiar with the Oregon Knowledge Bank, which is an online resource that has a lot of, basically their program one-pagers, where it's, okay, Lane County does their 416 program, and then it kind of details what the problem was, how they addressed the problem, and some successes, some considerations. And so we have talked internally about doing something like that around the efforts that are being done across the state. So Deschutes County's, advisory group talking about that, or the peer mentor program that's happening in Jackson County, and featuring those. That will take some legwork. It's something that we can certainly deliberate more internally to see if we can't have those in hand for counties come spring and summer. But yeah, thank you for that.
All right, I think we've completed the work for the day. Ian, again, and for Carrie and Kathleen, as well as the others that are monitoring us, including Ken. Looks like he's up there on the board. Thank you all very, very much for all the work you are doing and continue to do, and such a efficient, professional presentation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close our meeting today, and thank everyone for attendance. Hope everyone has a wonderful day and a great weekend. Be well.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Ian, can I sneak in a question? Did he go?